Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Last week, we told you about a ceasefire in West Asia between Israel and Hezbollah, bringing some hope of stability in the region. But it did not last because another conflict has flared up, the old civil war in Syria, with major cities falling to rebels and intense fighting on. Tonight, we'll bring you the latest on the ground and tell you what Vladimir Putin and President Erdogan of Turkey are doing in the Syrian war. Has Zelensky agreed to a ceasefire with Russia ceding control of Ukrainian territory? Why has Donald Trump threatened 100% tariffs on BRICS countries? Why US President Joe Biden has pardoned his son Hunter after saying for years that he won't do it? How Hindus continue to come under attack in Bangladesh? How China is supporting and strengthening the Pakistan Navy and how India should be seeing this? And what is Belgium's new law on sex workers that promises them pension and maternity benefits? All this and more coming up. The headlines first. US President Joe Biden heads for his first and final trip to Africa. He will visit oil-rich Angola for 3 days. The visit aims to highlight US investments in the continent. Biden's trip comes amid China's deepening influence in Africa. Israeli attacks killed 2 people in southern Lebanon. Beirut accuses Israel of violating the truce. France asks all sides to respect the ceasefire. It's been 6 days since the 2 countries declared a halt in fighting. Russian President Vladimir Putin set to visit India early next year. Indian Prime Minister Modi extended an invite to him during the BRICS summit this October. Putin will be here for the 23rd India-Russia annual summit. This will be the Russian president's first visit to India since the war in Ukraine began. 4th consecutive night of nationwide protests in Georgia. The Prime Minister rejects calls for new elections. Europe condemns the use of excessive police force. Georgia has been rocked by unrest since the ruling party paused EU accession talks. A deadly stampede at a Guinea stadium kills more than 50 people. It was triggered by a contested decision by the referee at a football match. Further stone pelting by spectators led to a stampede. Video showed dozens climbing over high walls trying to escape. And a landmark climate hearing is underway at the International Court of Justice. It aims to set a legal framework on how countries tackle climate change. This case was led by vulnerable island nations, especially Vanuatu. The ICJ will hear testimonies from almost 100 countries. This is the largest case in the court's history.
Diktatörlerin sonu budur. Diktatörlerin sonu budur. Allahu Ekber.
West Asia is on the boil again, only this time in a different country, Syria. It is witnessing intense fighting. An old conflict has flared up again. First, look at the images. This video is from Sunday. A bomb fell on a busy street in the city of Aleppo. Aleppo is one of the biggest cities of Syria. Large parts of Aleppo have now fallen to the rebels, including the heart of the city. And the Aleppo airport had to be shut. Reports say rebels have taken control of it. It was a lightning offensive. It began on Wednesday, and within a few days, the Assad regime lost control of Aleppo. The images are quite dramatic. There was a statue of Assad's brother, Basil, in the city. It was torn down by a group of armed men.
Diktatörlerin sonu budur. Diktatörlerin sonu budur. Allahu Ekber. Sonu budur. Allahu Ekber. Allahu Ekber. Allahu Ekber. Diktatörlerin sonu budur. Diktatörlerin sonu budur. Türk diktatörleri.
Reminds you of the fall of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. That was in 2003, when Iraqis brought down Saddam's statue in a similar fashion. But barring videos like these, of course, the Syria story is very different from Iraq. The Syrian civil war began in 2011 during the Arab Spring. Protesters wanted to overthrow President Bashar al-Assad. The protests turned into armed conflicts. Foreign players joined in. Terrorist groups exploited the chaos, but Assad held on with support from friends like Iran and Russia. But now Iran and Russia are involved in their own conflicts. Iran is pitted against Israel. Russia is fighting in Ukraine. So Bashar al-Assad was left vulnerable in Syria. And rebels exploited this opportunity to strike. As I said, it began last week. The rebels made gains immediately. They captured large chunks of land, including parts of provinces like Hama. Their next target is said to be Damascus, the capital of Syria. Will Assad be able to fend it off? At this point, his army appears outmatched.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر هاي الدبابات هاي الباصات الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر هاي الدبابات هاي دبابة ثانية غاد الله أكبر الله أكبر هاي دبابة.
So what exactly is happening here? How are the odds stacked? And who is leading this new offensive in Syria? You see, after years of conflict, Syria is a country with multiple power centers. The Assad regime controls only about 60% of it, only about 60% of the territory. In the east, it's the Kurds who hold sway. In the northwest, in cities like Idlib, there are other rebel groups. Despite using his full force, Assad has not been able to regain total control of his country. So again, who is behind this latest offensive? It's a group called HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. It's an offshoot of the Al-Qaeda and is being supported by smaller rebel groups. Now, the HTS is not a new group. They've been around since 2016. Until recently, they were the de facto rulers of Idlib, the city in the northwest. The group has around 30,000 fighters, which is a considerable number, big enough to mount a new offensive. And they're up against the Syrian army, which has the backing of Iran and Russia. The Syrian army is supported by Iran and Russia. So President Assad has powerful friends, and they're stepping up in his hour of crisis. Iran is sending militias to support Assad's army. Yesterday, they sent some 300 fighters via Iraq. Meanwhile, Russia is giving aerial support. Russian planes carried out airstrikes to neutralize the rebels. At least 25 people were killed in these Russian airstrikes. The Syrian Air Force was part of this operation. Together, they tried to push back the rebels. And as always, civilians are bearing the brunt of war.
صار قصف جراء استهداف مدينة إدلب 1/12/2024.
في حدا تحت؟
ليكا المرة ليكا شهيد. واحد 12/2024 استهداف الأحياء داخل مدينة إدلب.
The Iranian foreign minister has visited Damascus. He said the trip was supposed to send a message to demonstrate Tehran's firm support to Assad. Iran says its military advisors are in Damascus. They will remain there until the threat to the Assad regime is neutralized. And this is not a new deployment. Iran has been supporting Assad since the civil war began in 2011. As part of this support, they've stationed a team of advisors in Damascus. Moscow, too, has reiterated its support to the Assad regime.
Of course, we continue to support Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. We continue our contacts on the relevant levels. We analyze the situation in Syria. Russia's position will be formed in regard of what is needed for the stabilization of situation.
These words would be welcome in Damascus because President Assad faces a significant challenge and his political rivals are also ramping up attacks.
I assure you that we will continue this time, and we won't stop fighting until one of two things happens. Either this regime commits to the entire political process to implement the UN Security Council Resolution 2254 until we reach a political transition.
Syria says it has neutralized 1,000 rebels in the last week. But the fact is that this latest offensive has exposed Assad's weaknesses. His military appears weak and underprepared. He has lost control of a strategically significant city. He must contain, if not completely stop the rebels if he has to survive. And for that, he will need help from his allies, Moscow and Tehran. So the forgotten civil war has been reignited. What does it mean for the world? In this case, we don't have to guess. We simply have to look at the last decade because the concerns and the impacts remain the same. Number one is refugees. Syria is the largest refugee crisis in the world. Since the year 2011, more than 14 million people have fled their homes. 14 million. Fresh fighting means more refugees. Concern number two. Syria is a tinderbox of foreign forces. Look at all the countries deployed there. You've got the Russian forces, you've got Iranian militia, you've got Hezbollah fighters, around 900 American soldiers, dozens of Turkish troops, and in the skies, Israeli fighter jets. All these powers are involved in Syria. They have their own strategic goals there. Russia and Iran are fighting for President Assad. They support him. Turkey is backing the rebels, and the US is targeting extremist groups. So different and opposing goals, which make Syria a tinderbox. And finally, concern number three, a possible resurgence of the Islamic State or ISIS. You may remember what happened in the last decade. The Syrian civil war led to instability and chaos. ISIS used that chaos to expand its grip. They set up a caliphate across Syria and Iraq. At one point, ISIS controlled 1/3 of Syrian territory. It became their own kingdom of terror. They plotted attacks from there, radicalized people on the internet, and retreated to safety when attacked. It took a massive multi-nation coalition to defeat the ISIS. But if the fighting escalates again, who knows? ISIS may rise from the ashes. These are the three main concerns for the global community: another refugee crisis, a proxy war, and a resurgent ISIS. Now, you can add some of the usual West Asian variables to this, like rising oil prices and more military deployments. Simply put, this is a conflict you should care about. It has global financial and security implications. Now let's meet the main players. First is Turkey. When the anti-Assad protests first broke out in 2011, Ankara supported it. It supported the protesters. President Erdogan of Turkey wanted to topple Bashar al-Assad. He hosted Syrian opposition leaders. He also welcomed 3.6 million Syrian refugees. But Assad was not Erdogan's only enemy in Syria. The country is also home to Kurdish political and military groups. Erdogan considers them to be terrorists. He has launched cross-border attacks on these Kurdish groups. So Turkey's position is quite clear. They don't like Assad and they don't like the Kurds. So they're backing the rebels. The same rebels who just took control of Aleppo. Erdogan has not said anything about this operation, but chances are he knew about it. The rebels would not take such a big step without his approval. Which brings us to the second player, Russia. Moscow is an ally of the Assad regime. When the war broke out, they began sending weapons and advisors. Then in 2015, Russia intervened directly. They launched airstrikes on rebel positions, which made Assad's job easier. And what did Putin gain from this intervention, this operation? A major foothold in West Asia. But the latest tensions will worry him. Russian media is talking about a deep conspiracy. They believe that Ukraine, Turkey, France, and the US and Israel plotted this escalation in Syria. Why? To turn Russia's attention away from Ukraine. Well, the logic checks out, but there is absolutely no proof. And speaking of attention, the same can be said of Assad's other ally, Iran. Until 2015, Tehran kept Assad's regime afloat. Their proxy, Hezbollah, fought for Assad's army. Iran also recruited Shias from Pakistan, Afghanistan and Iraq. And all these fighters were key to Assad's success. They brought experience and weapons into his army. Just one problem though. Iran's focus is elsewhere right now. Hezbollah fighters returned when Israel attacked Lebanon. And Iran pulled back its militia as tensions rose. So Assad's army lost its backbone. The air support from Russia was gone and the ground support from Iran was much weaker. So the rebels decided to strike. Today, the foreign ministers of Turkey and Iran met in Ankara. Their differences were pretty clear. Iran blamed Israel and the US for last week's escalation. Turkey said, don't blame foreign interference.
According to the information we obtained, the terrorist organizations operating in Syria are in close relation and coordination with America and the Zionist regime. These groups have been encouraged to create an environment of insecurity in Syria with the aim of distracting from the Zionist regime's crimes in Palestine.
It would be a mistake at this time to try to explain the events in Syria by any foreign interference. This is a mistake that those who do not want to understand Syria's realities take refuge in.
The question is, what happens next? Russia has rushed air support to Syria. Some Iranian militias have also returned, so the regime is trying to fight back, but any counteroffensive will take time to unfold. By then, the rebels will be looking to capture more territory. They have dealt a deadly blow to Assad, not just militarily, but also politically. Assad was in control of more than 60% of Syrian territory. He was back in the Arab fold. The perception was that he was on the verge of winning this war. But clearly, he is at the mercy of Iran and Russia. Much like the civilian regime that collapsed in Afghanistan, without foreign support, Bashar al-Assad cannot survive. That can be said of Zelensky too. He cannot survive without foreign support, and that support is dwindling courtesy Donald Trump. So will the Ukraine war end in 2025? It's been on for more than 1,000 days, as we've been telling you. The situation on the ground is volatile. Ukraine is hitting deep inside Russia. Moscow is striking back with new weapons. On Sunday night, Russia launched 78 drones into Ukraine. Kiev says it shot down 32 of them. But that's not their only challenge. Winter is coming, the third winter of this war. The front lines are likely to freeze for the next few months. But Russia doesn't want to let up. Putin has approved a new budget for 2025. He's allocated $126 billion for military spending. $126 billion, that's 32.5% of the total Russian budget. For perspective, NATO countries are expected to spend 2.5% of their budget on defense. Putin plans to spend 32.5%. In 2024, military spending made up for 28.3% in Russia. So the message is clear. Putin is prepared to ramp up this war. What about the other side? Well, there's a contrast there. Ukraine seems to be signaling at a thaw. On Friday, the Ukrainian president gave an interview to a British media outlet. Zelensky was asked a simple question there. Would he accept NATO membership, but based on the current territory that Kiev holds? Listen to what he had to say.
The fact is that it is a solution to stop the hot stage of the war, because we can just give the NATO membership to the part of Ukraine that is under our control. Yes, it could be possible, but no one offered. But the invitation must be given to Ukraine within its internationally recognized border. You can't give invitation to just one part of a country.
Now, since the war began, Russia has occupied nearly 20% of Ukrainian territory. So right now, Kiev controls only 80% of Ukraine. Is Zelensky willing to let go of that for NATO membership? Well, that's what he's saying. But of course, there's a caveat. He says he will accept on the condition that NATO membership is offered to the whole of Ukraine. Confusing, right? Zelensky will accept membership for 80% of the territory, but he wants it to be offered to all of Ukraine. Does that mean that Ukraine is waving the white flag? In as many words as he can, Zelensky has said it. He said this could help end, and I'm quoting him, the hot phase of the war. But there are many ifs here. First of all, NATO has not offered any membership to him. Not for 80%, not for 100%. So this is a hypothetical question. Nonetheless, this response signals intent.
Our agenda also includes work on NATO. An invitation for Ukraine to join NATO is a necessary thing for our survival. We are working at all levels to strengthen the position of Ukraine and the entire Euro-Atlantic community. I am grateful to each and everyone who helps us.
So what happens to the lost territory, the 20% that Russia has? Zelensky says he will renegotiate its return with Russia, but in a diplomatic way. Well, good luck to him. This is making headlines because this is the furthest that Ukraine has gone to suggest that it would cede territory. And it's a very long shot for three reasons. One, Zelensky's plan does not have many takers in Ukraine. 20% is a big chunk after all. Top army commanders say the soldiers will be enraged, as will the citizens of Ukraine. So Zelensky may not survive this politically. Reason number two, NATO has not offered them membership. They did not want Kiev for the last 3 years. They do not want them now. And reason number three, Russia won't agree. Ukraine wanting to join NATO was the trigger for this war. It's unlikely that Moscow will agree to it now. If anything, this will escalate the conflict, with NATO pitted directly against Russia. Having said all of this, Zelensky's statement shows that he's trying to pick the best of the bad options that he has. Donald Trump will take office in 6 weeks from now. He wants to end the war on day one. That would mean concessions, especially for Ukraine. It could lose its territory anyway. So Zelensky is just making a virtue of it and signaling at peace. And while the US support for Ukraine remains dicey, Europe is trying to step up. This morning, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz arrived in Kiev, his second visit in 3 years. It's a surprise trip with two objectives. One, more aid for Ukraine. Scholz has pledged $680 million in military aid. And reason number two, pushing for NATO membership. Olaf Scholz will discuss it with Zelensky, and then he will raise it at a meeting in Brussels later this week.
Das sage ich heute hier in Kiew ganz deutlich an die Adresse.
My very clear message from Kiev to Putin: we're in this for the long haul, and we will stand by Ukraine for as long as it takes. We have talked not only to the current American administration, with which we had a very good cooperation in this regard, but we've already talked to the Donald Trump too. I believe that we can set on developing joint policies. This is everyone's aspiration. It is possible to do so, and in itself logical.
So where does that leave us? The Ukraine war has entered a complex and uncertain phase with signals of peace from Kiev, escalation from Moscow, and the global leadership in transition. 2025 could bring a turning point in this conflict. But will the war end? For now, that question remains open. Donald Trump has a new target, the BRICS group of nations. It started off as a club of 4 developing nations, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Over the years, 5 more countries joined. South Africa, Ethiopia, Iran, Egypt, and the UAE. So 9 members in total. The BRICS is often seen as an alternative to the G7, a sort of rival to the Western order, and Donald Trump doesn't like that. He's targeting a cornerstone of the BRICS agenda, de-dollarization. The idea is to reduce trade in US dollars and instead use local currencies. That is de-dollarization. Local currencies like the Indian rupee or the Russian ruble or the Chinese yuan. Donald Trump doesn't like that one bit. Listen to what he said on social media, and I'm quoting, "We require a commitment from these countries that they will neither create a new BRICS currency nor back any other currency to replace the mighty US dollar, or they will face 100% tariffs and should expect to say goodbye to selling into the wonderful US economy. They can find another sucker." A typical Trump threat. Adjectives plus high stakes plus Twitter post. But what's his plan here? Well, tariffs seem to be Trump's new favorite weapon, whether it's against Canada or against Mexico or against China, or now against the BRICS nations. Donald Trump says, promise to not abandon the US dollar. If not, he will impose a 100% tariff on BRICS goods. Suppose an Indian car is being imported into the US. The price of the car is $12,000. American importers will have to pay 100% of that as import duty. That means another $12,000. So the cost of that vehicle in America just doubled. That's how tariffs work. Now, how realistic is this threat by Donald Trump? Most of the BRICS nations have not reacted yet, but Russia has. They say such threats will accelerate the dollar's decline.
If the United States use force, as they say, economic influence of some kind, to make other countries use the dollar, it will probably further strengthen the tendencies to use national currencies. Dollar is beginning to lose its attractiveness as a reserve currency for a number of countries.
Trump's allies say it's all about leverage. He's not serious about the tariffs. He's using it to gain an upper hand in negotiations. They also point to the example of Canada. Last month, Trump threatened Canada with 25% tariffs. And what did Prime Minister Justin Trudeau do? He flew down to Florida and dined with Donald Trump. So his supporters say it's a winning strategy. Just two problems though. One, BRICS is not Canada. BRICS makes up 40% of the global population, more than 37% of the global GDP, and 23% of global trade. And their leaders are not like Justin Trudeau either. They don't respond well to threats, which brings us to the second problem. Trump's tariff logic is flawed. He seems to think that tariffs will not hurt American consumers. They will only hurt the exporting nations. Listen to his remarks on the campaign trail.
Tariff nation, it's not going to be a cost to you, it's going to be a cost to another country. I'm not raising your taxes, I'm raising China and all of these countries in Asia and all over the world, including the European Union, by the way, which is one of the most egregious.
Yes, tariffs will hurt exporting nations, but they will also hurt American consumers, because they will have to pay more for the same goods, which is why this 100% threat is all bluster. It's a very unlikely approach. Having said that, expect roadblocks to de-dollarization. Donald Trump will make it a lot harder than Joe Biden. So how can BRICS nations respond? For starters, there is no unity on this issue. Russia and China are aggressively pushing for de-dollarization. The other members are not. Like India. New Delhi's goal is to globalize the Indian rupee. It does not want to target the US dollar, and Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar has made that pretty clear.
We have never actively targeted the dollar. That's not part of either our economic policy or our political or our strategic policy. Some others may have.
The dollar makes up more than half of all trade invoices, plus 58% of forex reserves. The share is falling, but it's still quite high. It would take decades to overhaul this dollar dominance, and that is assuming that all BRICS nations are on board, which they're clearly not at this point. So Trump's best bet is to work with like-minded nations. Many countries dislike how America weaponizes its dollar dominance, like cutting countries off from payment systems or freezing their dollar reserves. That sort of stuff triggered the need for de-dollarization in the first place. Instead of correcting it, what does Donald Trump do? Threaten more economic coercion. In that context, Russia's warning does make sense. Right now, there is no global consensus on de-dollarization. Donald Trump's bravado might end up creating it. Now let's look at what the outgoing US president is up to. Joe Biden just threw a spanner in the works of justice. He issued a presidential pardon yesterday for his son, Hunter Biden. Hunter was charged with 2 crimes. He lied to buy a gun and he evaded taxes. He was found guilty of both these crimes by the American judiciary after due legal process. And all of this happened during Biden's presidency. And later this month, Hunter was about to be sentenced in both these crimes. But now US President Joe Biden has pardoned his son. He had promised not to do this on multiple occasions. He said the law was the same for all, so he would not pardon his son Hunter. He said this when he became president, when he was running for re-election, after he dropped out in favor of Kamala Harris, and again after she lost to Donald Trump. Joe Biden kept saying the same thing for years, that he believed in the US justice system and that he would accept the outcome in Hunter's cases. But as D-Day was approaching, Biden got cold feet and he decided to save his son. Joe Biden put out a statement yesterday. He tried to explain his decision to the American people. It's a long statement. I won't read it out to you, not the entire thing. But I do want to highlight some parts, starting with this one. From the day I took office, I said I would not interfere with the Justice Department's decision making, and I kept my word even as I have watched my son being selectively and unfairly prosecuted. It's a bit rich to say you kept your word while breaking it. Then he says, and I'm quoting again, "It is clear that Hunter was treated differently. I also believe raw politics has infected this process." Now, Biden may have a point here. His political opponents have been after Hunter Biden for years. Since 2018, they finally got Hunter on 2 cases. He was convicted for lying on a gun purchase form. The form asked if he was a drug user. Hunter lied and said that he was not a drug user. This happened in 2018, and he was found guilty, pronounced guilty earlier this year, in 2024. Now, Hunter is not the first American drug user to lie while buying a gun. Usually, these cases do not end in prison terms, not unless the drug user attacks someone. But Hunter Biden was likely to face jail time. While that's perfectly legal, Joe Biden says this was selective prosecution. Hunter Biden was also convicted of another crime for not paying about $1.4 million in taxes. He pleaded guilty to that in September. He agreed that he had evaded taxes. But then he paid off his dues, interest on them, and a fine for the tax evasion. He paid all of that. So Joe Biden argues that when people do this, they're usually given non-criminal resolutions. But Hunter Biden was most likely going to jail. So President Biden said this was selective prosecution. Both cases are being handled by a prosecutor who was appointed by former President Donald Trump. So yes, there may be some political bias. That's what Biden has used to justify the pardon. But here's the problem with all these excuses. It is legal for a president to appoint a prosecutor in the US. Every president does it. Biden has done it too. That's the system there. And while Hunter's punishment may seem harsh, it is also perfectly legal. Hunter wasn't getting some unheard of punishment. He was just not getting lenient punishment. And that happens all the time. Not all judgments are the same, even for the same crime. The punishment is up to the judges. That is how the US legal system works. So why should President Joe Biden complain? Especially if he believes that the system is fair. The truth is, Biden did not want his son to suffer, so he gave him an out. And not just for the 2 crimes I mentioned. This pardon is for, and I'm quoting, offenses against the United States which he has committed or may have committed or taken part in during the period from January 1st, 2014 through December 1st, 2024. Well, this is a sweeping pardon. It includes other crimes Hunter may have committed but hasn't been charged with yet. It basically gives Hunter Biden immunity from any and all wrongdoing over a period of 10 years. It doesn't matter what he did, he cannot be prosecuted, and this is final. A president's pardon cannot be undone, not by a different president or anyone else, not by a court. This is a step too far. How can you grant blanket immunity like that? It is frankly ridiculous. But sadly, it is possible in the US. The US president does hold sweeping powers like this. And multiple American presidents have exercised such powers in the past. Former President Bill Clinton pardoned his half-brother Roger for drug-related offenses. Donald Trump pardoned a host of people during his last term, including Charles Kushner, Jared Kushner's father, Ivanka Trump's father-in-law. Trump also pardoned Charles Kushner for tax evasion. And now Trump has tapped the same man, Charles Kushner, to become the next US ambassador to France. It seems anything goes in the US. American presidents are happy to abuse the justice system to keep their relatives and friends out of jail. Trump reacted to the news of Hunter's pardon with this post. He called it a miscarriage of justice. But he also hinted that he would pardon his supporters, the people who were part of the January 6th Capitol riots. Trump called them hostages. So don't be surprised if he pardons them as soon as he can. And after Biden's latest move, why wouldn't he? What is stopping Donald Trump? Biden and the Democrats always claimed that they held the moral high ground, that they were better than Trump and his Republicans. But by pardoning Hunter, President Joe Biden has shattered that holier-than-thou image and exposed the deep rot within the American justice system. Speaking of rot, let's turn to Bangladesh. Hindus in the country are facing rising attacks. Last week, 3 temples were vandalized. An angry mob targeted and damaged their premises. Meanwhile, 2 priests were arrested by the police. The situation worsened further. More than 60 ISKCON monks were stopped from leaving Bangladesh. They reportedly felt unsafe and wanted to come home to India. The monks had valid Indian visas for entry, but the Bangladeshi border force denied them passage. These monks are affiliated to ISKCON, the same temple trust that is at the center of a growing controversy. Last week, the arrest of a former ISKCON priest heightened tensions. And now, with Hindus being targeted again, India-Bangladesh ties are being tested. Here's a report.
It's a difficult time to be a Hindu in Bangladesh. The community has faced repeated attacks. Just last week, 3 temples were vandalized by an angry mob. Bricks were hurled and the premises were damaged. What sparked this violence? The arrest of Chinmoy Krishnadas, a former ISKCON priest. He was arrested on sedition charges and denied bail. This case is now testing Bangladesh's relationship with India. India has expressed concern over the arrest and demanded the safety of Hindus from Bangladesh. So far, the interim government of Muhammad Yunus has been dismissive. This reaction has made the community more nervous. ISKCON says over 60 of their monks were stopped from leaving Bangladesh. Apparently, they were scared by recent events and wanted to come to India. The monks had valid visas, but Bangladeshi border police stopped them. They claim India is not safe for these monks to enter. According to an ISKCON official, at least 4 monks have been arrested. Their fears are not misplaced. Chinmoy Krishnadas's arrest set off a chain reaction of events, and all of them have sparked concerns over the safety of Hindus. After Das's arrest, 2 more Hindu priests were arrested in Bangladesh. Even Indian tourists are not being spared. A 22-year-old from Kolkata had recently travelled to the country. He visited Dhaka, the capital city, where he was beaten up by a group of unidentified men. The ordeal didn't end there. The attackers pulled out a knife and threatened the victim. They took away his wallet and mobile phone. No one came to the youth's help. Even the police refused to take a complaint. The situation in Bangladesh is anything but normal, and it has sparked concerns across the border in India. The Indian state of West Bengal is on alert. It shares a border with Bangladesh. West Bengal's chief minister wants UN peacekeepers to be sent to Bangladesh. Mamata Banerjee has appealed to the Indian Prime Minister. She wants the minorities in Bangladesh to be protected. The rising tensions have prompted India to take additional measures. The government is cracking down on illegal immigrants from Bangladesh. Recently, a former BNP leader was arrested in Kolkata, the capital of West Bengal. The BNP, or Bangladesh Nationalist Party, is led by Khaleda Zia. The arrested leader had been living in India for 2 years using a fake passport. He entered the country illegally using forged documents to change his identity. One cannot dismiss the likelihood of more such crackdowns as the relationship between India and Bangladesh is put to the test.
Let's turn to Pakistan now. They're hosting next year's ICC Champions Trophy. But one team will not be travelling there, arguably the most important one, Team India. It's been a raging controversy for months now. India wanted to play its matches outside Pakistan, but Pakistan said no exceptions. Everyone must travel. Last week, the ICC met to resolve the deadlock. That's the International Cricket Council, ICC, the global governing body of cricket. They haven't publicly announced a decision yet, but reports say the tournament will be hybrid, meaning India will play its matches outside Pakistan. Other teams will play inside Pakistan. We don't know which country will host India's matches, but the UAE's name is doing the rounds. The Pakistan Cricket Board's chairman was in Dubai over the weekend. He met the Emirates Cricket Board chief. So chances are the UAE could be the neutral ground. But how did this turnaround happen? Pakistan was pretty adamant about India travelling to their country. So what changed their mind? Reports say the ICC gave them two options. Option A, take the hybrid model. Option B, lose the hosting rights. The second option would have been a major setback. Pakistan would have lost millions in revenue along with the hosting rights. Maybe that explains their sudden U-turn. But the story does not end with that. The PCB, Pakistan Cricket Board, may have agreed, but they have also set some terms. The first is equality. If India won't play in Pakistan, then Pakistan won't play in India either. You see, India is slated to host 4 ICC tournaments. The Women's One-Day World Cup in 2025, the 2029 Champions Trophy, the 2026 Men's T20 World Cup, and the 2031 Men's One-Day World Cup. That's 4 events in the coming 6 years. Pakistan says we won't travel to India for these matches. They will have to be held on neutral ground, a sort of tit for tat. Condition number 2, Pakistan wants a greater share of ICC revenue. Right now, India gets 38% of the revenue. The total revenue. Pakistan gets only 5.7%. They want their share to be increased. But will India and the ICC agree to these terms? Reports say India is unlikely to give such guarantees. Even if they do, some of these tournaments are years down the line, up to 2031. Who knows what will happen by then? Because India's cricketing power is only growing. Yesterday, Jay Shah took over as the ICC chairperson. He's the youngest person to hold that post. He's also the son of India's Home Minister Amit Shah. And that's a key point to note here. This is not a call taken only by the Indian Cricket Board. Politicians, fans, governments, all of them agree. I mean, just look at the situation in Pakistan. November was a very violent month there. Some 257 people were killed in terror attacks, and that included 104 security personnel. Why would anyone send their cricket team to such a country? The Indian board will be congratulated for this, but Pakistan's board is under fire. They are being ridiculed by fans and former cricketers. Some fans are saying that the board is sold out, and they can only blame themselves. Because the fact is, Pakistan overplayed their hand. Did they really think that other ICC members would support them? That too against India. This hybrid model was proposed months back. Had Pakistan accepted then, they could have avoided the embarrassment. But now even their own fans are mocking them. As for India, this is a glimpse into its cricketing roadmap and ideology. Jay Shah talked about cricket's inclusion in the Olympics, about expanding the women's game and making it more inclusive. But there are red lines that India will not cross. And to enforce them, the Indian board is more than willing to throw its weight around. We're not done with Pakistan yet. India is facing a new challenge from Pakistan's military. This one is coming on the high seas. Pakistan's navy is rapidly expanding its fleet and deploying more ships in India's backyard. The generals in Pakistan have an ambitious plan for their navy. They aim to create a 50-ship navy. But to what end? What is the goal behind this modernization drive? To reshape the balance of power in the region. Reports say the Pakistani Navy is aggressively adding new boats. But we know that Islamabad struggles to pay its electricity bills, so how can they afford new boats? Who is helping them? As always, it's the Chinese. China is equipping Pakistan's navy. Says who? India's Navy Chief, among others, that's Admiral Dinesh Tripathi. He said that New Delhi is carefully monitoring these developments.
We are aware about the growth, surprising growth of Pakistan Navy, and they aim to become a 50-ship force by some time, by next decade. Seeing the economy of Pakistan, it is very surprising that how they are building or getting so many ships and submarines. Obviously, they have decided to choose weapons over welfare of their people. So, good luck to them.
They chose weapons over people. Very well put. That's the story of Pakistan in 5 words. But coming back to the naval expansion, let's look at how it began. The foundations were laid in 2015 when Pakistan and China signed a contract. It was for 8 submarines. 4 were supposed to be built in China. The other 4 were to be assembled in Karachi. This contract was worth $5 billion. Now, the deliveries of these subs has begun. The first submarine arrived in Pakistan in the month of April. Another 3 are expected by 2028. Reports say China could be delivering or could be looking at delivering 1 submarine to Pakistan every year. Plus, there are upgrades in the pipeline. Pakistan plans to add a total of 50 new ships by the next decade. Out of these, 20 will be major warships. Now, most of these will be supplied by China, but there are 2 other suppliers in the mix, Turkey and Romania. Pakistan has expressed willingness to acquire some vessels from them as well. Again, the question is, where is the money coming from? Who is going to foot the bill for this? Islamabad certainly cannot afford a naval expansion. The government is struggling to balance its finances. There is a $2.5 billion gap in the budget. Last month, a team from the IMF traveled to Islamabad, the International Monetary Fund. They traveled to discuss the funding shortfall. Remember, Pakistan is part of an IMF bailout program. The country has been bailed out for a record 23 times by the IMF. That's the highest for any country. And guess what? They've already filed another bailout request. They're asking for bailout number 24. So clearly, a naval expansion seems impractical. But this is Pakistan. The army is likely to have its way. Despite its financial troubles, Pakistan's military never faces budget constraints. It doesn't matter who is in power. Rawalpindi always gets a blank check. Take this year, for instance. Pakistan's budget for defense was hiked by nearly 15%. I'll repeat that. The budget was hiked, defense budget, by 15%. So India cannot afford to take this lightly. It must prepare to counter Pakistan on the high seas. The Indian Navy has its own expansion plan in the works. It wants to get 6 new nuclear-powered subs. The government has already approved plans to build 2 of them. Additionally, plans are also in place to get new fighter jets for the Navy.
62 ships and 1 submarine is under construction in various DPSUs, PSUs, and private shipyards in the country. And there is an acceptance of necessity for 31 more ships and submarines.
India's next major military challenge is likely to emerge from the high seas. This threat has been brewing for some time now. China is intensifying pressure campaigns. Its military vessels and spy ships are encroaching on waters near India's borders. Now, Beijing has taken this campaign a step further. It is arming Pakistan to open another front against India. The strategy is quite clear: to create a 2-pronged maritime threat. India's upcoming naval upgrades are much needed to counter this rising challenge. Our next story is from Belgium. It has approved a new labor law for its sex workers. It gives them a lot of employment rights. They have access to health care now. They can take maternity leave and they will get pensions. They can terminate their contract anytime they want. They can refuse sexual acts. This law is a first in the world, the first of its kind. It sets a precedent for other countries. In 78 nations across the globe, sex work is legal or partially legal, yet there are no protections for these people. Will this new law by Belgium change that? Our next report tells you.
It's a first in the world. Belgium has approved new laws for its sex workers. It will give them health insurance, pensions, family benefits, holidays and more importantly, maternity leave. Essentially, rights that are equal to any other job in the world. In 2022, Belgium became the first country to decriminalize self-employed sex work. It was prompted by mass protests. The COVID-19 pandemic left sex workers without jobs and they were struggling for state support. Belgium has now moved to change that. The law went into effect on Sunday. It gives sex workers employment contracts and the perks that come with it. Not just that, sex workers can now refuse any client. They can also refuse any sexual act. They can also interrupt a sexual act at any time without fear of dismissal or punishment. And the onus now falls on employers. They must ensure the premises are clean. Rooms are equipped with panic buttons and there is access to showers and condoms. If the workers are not comfortable, they can press the panic button. Any employer convicted of a serious crime cannot employ any sex worker.
I think the benefits of the new law now are that it is easier to get a loan from the bank. It is also easier to get insurance and pension. That will be better for us. And if you are sick, you will also get an allowance.
Plus, the employment benefits are not tied to contracts. If a worker wants to leave the job, they can do so. They will still receive benefits like health insurance and unemployment benefits. This is a crucial step towards their economic freedom. All of this is also anonymous. That way they can apply to any other job without the fear of discrimination. Prostitution is legal or partially legal in 78 countries across the globe like Germany, Greece, the Netherlands and Turkey. There are millions of sex workers globally, but when it comes to protections, there are few. Legalizing prostitution was about making it safe. It was about giving workers access to healthcare and access to equal rights. Instead, it turned into a massive industry, one that generates millions in taxes but does little for the workers. And this is the case in places where it's legal. So imagine what it's like in countries where it's not legal. Sex work exists there too, except it escapes legal scrutiny. Governments turn a blind eye, and paying the price are millions of workers. It leaves them susceptible to violence and exploitation with no access to safety or support. Belgium wants to change that with this new law, and it's setting a global precedent. Sex work exists in every corner of the world despite stigmas and legal barriers. This new law challenges the stereotypes and acknowledges a simple truth. Sex work is work, and sex workers deserve the same rights as any other worker. Fair wages, safe conditions, and protection from harassment. By granting these rights, Belgium takes a bold step towards equality, regardless of the moral judgments that people may have.
Many of you will be familiar with parental pressure. When you're young, you're at the receiving end. In school, it's about getting good grades. In your early 20s, it's about your career, getting a good job and career growth. And then when you're in your late 20s, a switch flips. Suddenly, parents are nagging you about marriage, settling down, starting a family. This experience is near universal. People around the world experience this pressure. But the people of Vietnam have come up with a solution, a way to placate their parents. They've started renting partners. There's a trend called rent a boyfriend. It's surging in Vietnam as women look to focus on their career and keep the parents at bay. Here's a report.
Are you seeing anyone?
When will you get married?
I want grandchildren.
A lot of you may have heard these words from your parents, especially if you're in your late 20s or, God forbid, on the wrong side of 30. Suddenly, it seems marriage is all your parents can talk about. If you're experiencing this, you aren't alone. This is a global phenomenon. It affects people in every part of the world, but everyone deals with it differently. The people of Vietnam have adopted a novel solution. They are renting partners to hoodwink their parents. There's been a surge in social media groups offering boyfriends or girlfriends on rent. Vietnamese women in particular are fueling this trend. They put out their requirements for a boyfriend, like fitness levels, cooking ability, even talent with photography. They select a partner that fits the criteria and then head off to meet the parents. This way, the parents get to see the fake boyfriend, their fears are put to rest, and then the renter can go back to their normal lives. Now, all of this might sound a bit absurd. Why go through all this trouble to deceive parents? Why not just date someone for real? Well, these days, a lot of people would rather focus on their careers. The 20s and 30s are for becoming financially stable, so many just don't have the time to date. This means average marriage ages have gone up. In major Vietnamese urban centers like Ho Chi Minh City, it reached close to 30. This was in 2022. So, career focus is one reason people opt to rent partners. Sometimes the renters are people from the LGBTQ+ community. They aren't ready to come out of the closet, so they choose to rent a partner their parents would approve of, until they're ready to tell their parents the truth. Of course, deception like this has major downsides. If the parents find out, it could break their hearts. They might stop trusting their children completely. Then there are risks with the rented partners themselves. This isn't a legitimate industry after all. There aren't proper standards or complaint departments. The renters might even be blackmailed by their fake partners. People who have used the service have suggested using reputed renting agencies and signing stringent contracts which prevent emotional ties and sexual harassment. The fact that contracts like this exist means that the rent-a-partner industry is picking up steam. More and more people are opting for the service. And it's not just in Vietnam. You have similar services in China as well. It seems parental pressure is the same everywhere, and children everywhere are finding new ways to avoid a lecture.
Humans once built pyramids, invented flights, and went to the moon. Now we spend hours watching people peel an egg. Welcome to the age of brain rot. It is the Oxford Dictionary Word of the Year. If you have spent this year mindlessly scrolling on the internet, you already know what it is. Brain rot is spending hours on your phone consuming mind-numbing, low-quality content. This term saw a 230% increase in usage from 2023 to 2024. After all, it perfectly captures the disease of our times. You may not remember what's important, but the exact dance moves from a viral reel, that's muscle memory at this point. Of course, the internet had a lot to say about this word of the year. Take a look. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. 96 people joined hands mid-air to set a new world skydiving record. Thousands of Volkswagen workers protest in Germany over wage cuts, and 2,500 giant panda sculptures arrive in Hong Kong for exhibitions around the city. Finally, we are taking you back in history. On this day in 1971, the United Arab Emirates was established. It became a federation of 7 emirates that gained independence from Britain. More than 5 decades later, the tiny desert communities have turned into global trade and innovation hubs. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Con